Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to complete our series on how to record, produce, and edit professional sounding vocal tracks in a home studio. In our first video, we looked at the recording process. And in the last video, we looked at my method for comping the best possible vocal performance. I'll link both of those videos in the description box below if you haven't checked them out yet. So the final step in the process of creating pro vocals is tuning. Now, I know tuning and auto-tune specifically are hot topics in the music production world, and they elicit some seriously strong opinions. But here's my take. Any type of process that corrects pitch is a tool. It's not inherently bad or wrong, nor inherently good or right. It is simply a tool to be used at the discretion of the people creating the music. Certain styles of music lend themselves better to a heavy-handed approach to vocal tuning, and certain styles need a light touch or no tuning at all. It's all about context and creative intent. The truth is, most modern music has some type of pitch correction applied to the vocals. There's even an argument to be made that the proliferation of vocal tuning technology has literally changed the way we perceive pitch as a culture. But that's a topic for a different video. We're here to learn my method for tuning vocals to make them sound professional. So I learned most of this method from an early mentor of mine in Nashville, and it's all about transparency. So I don't use auto-tune or any other automatic tuning software in my final vocal sound. Instead, I use Melodyne because of the ability to choose specific spots to apply pitch correction to. The goal with pitch correction for me is to apply it in a way that is invisible. We don't want to hear the pitch correction happening. We want the vocal to retain all of its natural characteristics, but just fix the spots in the performance that we're lacking in terms of pitch. Now, you might be asking, why am I not using Logic Pro's flex pitch? I am the Logic Pro guy after all. The truth is, most of what I teach in this video can be applied to flex pitch as well, and in some ways it might even be easier to use flex pitch because it's contained all within Logic Pro. But I learned how to tune in Melodyne, and simply I'm just more comfortable with my ability to get the results I'm after in Melodyne. So our first step, as always, is to save a new project alternative. I'm going to be flattening the comp folders as part of this process, so I want to make sure I have a version of my session containing the comp folders that I can go back to if I need. Then to prepare the tracks, I'm going to select all of the regions in my vocal tracks, click on one of the letter icons in the top left-hand corner of a region. I'll choose this B here, and then I'm going to select Flatten and Merge. This is going to create one continuous region on each track and will bake in the crossfades. If you choose Flatten, it will simply flatten the comp folder and leave you with a separate region for each piece of the comp. Now, this step is not strictly necessary, but it makes things visually cleaner and gives you the opportunity to look over everything you have comped and recorded, make sure everything's in the right place, and maybe rename some tracks, things like that if you need to. Again, as I spoke about in the previous video, I am not flying the choruses yet, because I intend to copy the vocals on this first chorus here to the other choruses in the song. I will wait until after I have tuned them to perform this copying. That way I only have to tune them once. So I could use Melodyne as a plugin inside of Logic Pro. They even have the Aura version, which theoretically allows you to tune multiple tracks inside of one plugin window. However, I have found it just way too unstable to rely on. But the main reason I don't use Melodyne as a plugin is because of the flying the vocals thing. So check it out. I'll analyze the lead vocal for the chorus, and then I'll just push the first note up to an E here, just so we can hear the change clearly. I know it's the wrong note. Now, if I fly this region over to the next chorus and hit play there, you hear that the tuning didn't copy over. It's still on the original note, which means I would have to tune this section twice. So to avoid this, or any complex workarounds to avoid this, and because of the instability of the Melodyne plugin, I choose to export my vocal tracks and bring them into the standalone Melodyne application. And because I will print these vocals dry without any effects, it has the added bonus of forcing me to listen to the raw vocals. That way I'm really able to hear the deficiencies in my pitch and timing, and I'm not distracted by any fancy sounding effects or processing. Okay, to get these vocals out of Logic and into Melodyne, we are first going to create a cycle range that is the entire length of the song. This is very important in order to keep all of the tracks we are about to export synced up. Then we're going to select all of the track headers for the vocals, then come to the File menu, go to Export, and we're going to choose Export Tracks as Audio Files. Then in the Export window, we need to set a few things up. First, I like to make a new folder to house these exported files. I'll call it Vocals for Melodyne. Then for the range, we want to make sure to select Export Cycle Range Only. This will make sure that every track is exported the same length, and that way they stay synced up when we import them into Melodyne. We then want to check the tick box next to Bypass Effect Plugins. Because we want the dry, unaffected vocals for use in Melodyne, we want the tuning to come before any of our other plugins like EQ or compression. This will give us the most natural and transparent results. We don't need to include the audio tail, as the cycle will take care of that. We don't want to include any volume or pan automation because, again, we want the dry, unchanged recordings. You can include tempo information if you want, but I generally leave it off and just change the tempo of Melodyne manually. And finally, we want to make sure to turn normalize off because, again, we don't want anything to change about our audio files during this export process. The point of all of this nuance is to make sure that we get perfectly synced up raw vocal files to work with in Melodyne. Now hit export, Logic will do its thing and leave you with your exported vocal tracks in the folder you created. The final thing we need to do in Logic before jumping over to Melodyne is to bounce an instrumental to use as our guide track. Simply mute all of the vocals and bounce the project. Make sure to leave the cycle on when you do this because Logic will automatically bounce the cycle length, which will ensure that this instrumental is synced up with our vocal tracks. All right, now we're ready to open up Melodyne. The first thing I will do is come up to this drop-down menu, choose Edit Tempo, and type in our song tempo of 95 BPM. Now we can come to the File menu, choose Import Audio, and import our vocal tracks and instrumental. It will automatically apply its detection algorithm and import all of the tracks into this top track view here. I'm going to start by just organizing the order of the tracks, and then I will save the project. Okay, now that everything is in order, let's look at a quick overview of the Melodyne software. To start, here in the top middle, we have a transport bar, very similar to the LCD in Logic Pro. It contains tempo information, playhead placement information, playback controls, and a master volume fader. Then you can access the different window sections of Melodyne with these 4 controls on the left. The farthest icon to the left displays the info pane. And this section has 4 different choices: track, note, project, and file, with track being the most useful, and it resembles the channel strip in Logic Pro. The next section is called the tracks view. This is the top section here, which very much resembles the main edit window in Logic Pro, with all the tracks laid out vertically and containing waveform representations of the audio and a track header to the left. The next and most important window section is the note editor. That is this bottom portion here where you see the pitches of the performance laid out in these blobs. This is where we will be doing the tuning work. And you see it is laid out very similarly to the Logic Pro piano roll, with each note represented on one line and the black and white keys of a keyboard shown as white and gray lines. And finally, we have the sound editor, which allows you to adjust things like EQ, but for our purposes, this is not useful as we want to adjust the tuning and timing here in Melodyne and leave things like EQing for Logic. It's also important to take note of the algorithm menu here at the top. So Melodyne includes 5 different algorithms to detect the pitches of imported tracks. Typically, the program will select the appropriate algorithm automatically upon import, but you can select a different algorithm in this menu if you need to. Alright, so you change which tracks are displayed in the note editor by selecting the orange Melodyne logo in the track header. The gray Melodyne logo will show the track in the note editor, but only for reference. It will not be editable. This can be helpful for comparing two tracks while only working on one. And note that if you click in the ruler in the track view, it will play the entire mix. But if you click in the ruler in the note editor, it will only play the tracks selected to edit. This will be important as we get into our tuning workflow. Now that we have our first vocal track selected, let's quickly go over the tools available to us in Melodyne. In the far left, we have editing mode, which is denoted by the Melodyne logo. And next to it, we have this wrench icon, which switches us to note assignment mode. This mode is helpful if one of your notes has been identified in an incorrect octave and you want to quickly fix it without having to reanalyze the whole track. We have the main tool, otherwise known as the cursor. We have the pitch tool, which allows us to edit the pitch, pitch modulation, and pitch drift. We have the formant tool, then the amplitude tool, then the time tool, and finally the note separation tool. All of these tools are useful, but the main tools we're going to use today are the pitch tool, the time tool, and the note separation tool. You can quickly switch between tools by right-clicking anywhere in the note editor window. This is also where you can reset any edits you have made to a selected blob, which is very handy. Let's look a little closer at the three options for the pitch tool. The main pitch tool just allows you to change the pitch of a selected blob. Pretty simple. But the other two are a bit more complex. The pitch modulation tool allows you to increase or decrease the amount of up and down wavering that is happening within a given blob. So you can see this curvy line that runs through the blob. That is tracking the modulation of the note, or how much I am wavering from a completely static pitch during the note. Having this curvy line is very much a pleasing part of a vocal sound. It's called vibrato, and it gives the voice its natural sound. So you don't want to make this a straight line, or it will sound completely unnatural and robotic. But sometimes the voice wavers a bit too much, and you can rein that in with the pitch modulation tool. The next tool is the pitch drift tool, and this one allows you to affect the overall low to high drift of the pitch within a given blob. See how on this note the line starts a little higher and then trends downward as I sing throughout the notes? The pitch drift tool allows me to bring that downward drift up to be more consistent with the beginning of the note. On and rain, on and rain, on and rain. The note separation tool is going to be our second most used tool because it is very helpful in maintaining the natural sound of the vocal when tuning. Two common areas for slicing a blob into smaller parts are on sibilants and on sliding notes. Sometimes when you tune sibilants, especially S's, they can sound harsh and artificial. To fix this, you just chop the S out and tune just the preceding note. Even more useful is cutting sliding notes into smaller chunks. See how the line slides up pretty high on this blob? Instead of moving the blob all together, it can sound much more natural and accurate to chop the blob into three parts. That initial low part, the high part, and then the return to the low part. That way I can massage the pitch of each parts of the slide individually to retain a natural sound, but always make sure the pitch is accurate. I know your depth. You can also adjust the transition between these notes with the pitch slide tool, but we will look at this in a little more detail later. Now there are two keyboard shortcuts you need to be aware of in Melodyne. First is that you hold down Option in order to tweak the pitch by sense. You also hold Option and click and drag to stretch or compress blobs to adjust their timing. And finally, a super helpful shortcut is holding Option and Command to bring up the zoom tool. You can then click and drag to make a zoom selection. Before we continue on with the video, I've got a free gift just for you. A topic that causes a lot of confusion in Logic Pro are buses. So I've created the definitive guide to buses in Logic Pro. In this comprehensive video guide, you'll learn what buses are, how to use them, and advanced busing techniques. We start with the very basics and go all the way through some pretty advanced stuff. And I truly believe there's something in this video for everyone. So hit the link in the description box below the like button and download your free copy today. Now, as I stated before, my goal here is not pitch perfection. Really, I want to adjust as few notes as possible. I'm going to listen for notes that stick out to me as inaccurate. I'm not going to tune every blob to 0 cents. I'm going to identify by ear the notes that are inaccurate enough to cause an issue, and then I'm going to fine-tune those notes only. Obviously, each song is different and each genre will require a slightly different level of pitch accuracy. If this were a full-on pop tune, I would most likely tune with a heavier hand. But in this folksy tune, I'm going to leave the vocal as natural sounding as possible. Similarly to comping, I like to tune one vocal track at a time and do it while listening to the instrumental. To do this in Melodyne, we need to make sure we use the ruler at the top in the tracks view to navigate around the session. I'm going to mute all of the other tracks except for the instrumental and the track I'm working on, and then select the Melodyne logo on this first vocal track. This way we will hear the instrumental and the one vocal, but only see the blobs of the vocal track we're working on in the note editor. And then if we need to listen to just the vocal to really fine tune something, we can click in the note editor's ruler and hit play there. This is a slightly quirky way of working for sure, but it's what works best for me. As always, I encourage you to take what you learn in my videos and apply it to your own workflow. All right, now I'm just going to play through and listen for any notes that stand out to me as too out of tune.
Whiskey bottle, I know you're dead.
So it's really important to not get distracted by the visual representation of the note editor here. It is very tempting to tune by sight, but you've got to fight the urge to snap everything to perfect pitch and make it look good. You have to use your ears to make your decisions. Because of this, a lot of the time when listening for notes that need to be fixed, I will close my eyes. When I do find a note that needs to be adjusted, I will again fight the urge to double click it and snap it to perfect pitch. I am instead going to hold Option and click and drag up or down to fine tune the pitch. Because of the vibrato of my voice and because we have a lot of other real instruments in this song that aren't bang on in perfect tune, that middle 0 cents position is not always going to sound perfectly in tune. Every note requires its own unique setting to sound perfectly in tune with the other instruments that are happening at that time. And the only way to find this correct setting is by ear. So training your ear to hear and correct for pitch imperfections is a skill all in its own. And honestly, it's one that takes years to develop. If you're new to listening for tuning, here's a tip. Try to identify a physical sensation that you get in your body when you hear an out of tune note. It may be a tightness in your chest or a clenching of your teeth, but chances are you will have some type of physical response to an unpleasant sound. At first, this will be to large discrepancies in pitch, but over time, you can recognize this feeling and hone it to alert you to smaller and smaller pitch variations. This just takes practice. Eventually, you won't have to look out for those physical markers at all. It will just be an immediate red flag that pops up in your brain when you hear a wrong note. So at this stage, I'm listening for very small imperfections. For example, in the first line of the second verse, just the last syllable of another sounds a bit flat.
Another step.
So I'm just gonna nudge that syllable up a bit.
Another step.
This end of the second pre-chorus is a great example of how light of a touch I'm using in this song in an effort to retain as much natural character of my voice as possible. So you can see how none of these first 6 blobs are right on pitch.
You know the storm never left.
But none of them sound wrong to me in context. In fact, listen to what it would sound like if I did snap them all to perfect pitch.
You know the storm never left.
Pretty awful, right? Definitely not appropriate for this song. So it's always important to keep the context of the genre and the goals of the production in mind while tuning. Now, when it comes time to tune the doubles, I will listen to them with the lead and the instrumental as well. And this is where I will use that gray Melodyne logo button to show the blobs of the lead in the note editor behind the double I am currently tuning. When tuning doubles, I'm listening for 2 things: pitch accuracy, of course, but also the rhythmic synchronization with the lead. So we did some editing to match the rhythm of the performances while comping, but Melodyne is our last line of defense to get these tracks to match up perfectly. I am especially listening out for final consonants and then using the timing tool to edit the timing of the double to perfectly match that of the lead.
Whiskey bottle, I know your depth. Last night's lie. Last night's lies.
And we can work some serious magic with the timing tool in Melodyne. It's really cool. So check out this very last line of the song. I sang every take completely different in this section, and I didn't have a good double to choose from, honestly.
But I'm so broken, there's nothing left.
But we can fix this and have it sound natural with Melodyne. And this is where you can use your eyes a bit to aid you in the editing. Having the gray blob of the lead we're trying to match gives us a visual guide to how we need to move the blobs of the double around in order to make it match up.
I'm so broken, there's nothing left.
Now, fortunately, my pitch in this song was pretty good overall, and I didn't have to make too many adjustments to get things sounding right. You can see here in the chorus, most notes are pretty bang on, and even the harmonies only needed slight tweaking to lock them in.
I feel the thunder.
But I'm not perfect, and I would be remiss if I didn't show you an example of when I sang absolutely terribly and how much tuning it took to make it sound good. Okay, so I did these background vocal parts in the bridge, this patty kind of thing. I really like the idea of it, but I recorded it at the end of my vocal recording session and I was fatigued and just not feeling it anymore, and honestly, I just sang horribly. But I still like the part, and it's a background part, so I think we can tune it a bit harder and still have it fit in with the vibe of the song. Just because it's back in the mix, it's not super forward. And I ended up chopping these terrible slides up and tuning them all perfectly. I also used the modulation tool a lot to bring down the wobbliness of the performance and lock in the chords better. This is also a good example of how to use that pitch slide tool I mentioned before. In between consecutive notes that have their own blobs, you'll get this small horizontal orange line here. And if you hover the pitch tool over it, the cursor turns into the pitch slide tool, which allows you to increase or decrease the amount of slide in between each note. By increasing the amount of slide, you can smooth out a harsh transition such as this one. It almost works like adding a crossfade to smooth out an edit point. All right, you ready for this? Here is the type of restorative magic you can do with Melodyne if you need to. Obviously, we're not going to tune our lead this aggressively, but for this background part, man, I think it really saved the day. All right, now that we have touched on every track in the session, I will give it one final listen through to everything together just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Now we're ready to export our tracks out of Melodyne and get them back into Logic. First, you need to make sure to put all volume faders back to 0 dBs. because the volume fader setting will be written into the export files. Then we can come to File and Export. Then in the Export menu, we're going to change range to entire length. Because we did all that work in Logic to make sure the files were all the same length, we don't need to do anything fancy now. Then we will make sure that individual file for each track is selected so we get our separate files, and then we hit export. And again, I like to make a new folder for these files and I'll call it tuned vocals. One final step I like to take before importing these files into Logic is to add the word tuned to the end of each file name so that they don't overwrite the original files when imported into Logic. To do this quickly, I use an application called Name Changer, and I'll just replace the _1 at the end of each file name with space tuned. There we go, nice and clean looking. Now we can open up Logic and drag these new files in. I like to drag them to new tracks and then drag each region to replace the untuned region on the existing tracks. I do it this way just so I can double check that the placement is correct and that we have everything we need. And the final step is to fly the vocals. This is where I will copy that one chorus I recorded to all of the other choruses in the song. I also had to do a bit more editing in the last chorus to line up all the doubles with the ad-libs. Of course, never stop being creative. As I was flying these vocals, I got the idea to use the original lead in the chorus as an extra harmony part during the ad-lib at the end. And it worked out really well.
I feel the thunder rolling in. You say the silver linings at the end.
Never miss an opportunity to be inspired and to improve your song, no matter how mundane the task may seem. And I just like to clean up the empty space in the files. It's not necessary, but I'm a bit of a neat freak with my sessions, so I'm gonna do it. And there we go, we have recorded, comped, edited, and tuned our final vocals. Let's have a listen to a little before and after.
Whiskey bottle, I know you're dead. Last night's lies still on my breath. Morning rain cries with the proof, but through this fog I can't find the truth. My mind is hurricanes and lightning. I swear the storm never left. But I'm so broken, there's nothing left to mend.
Hopefully you can hear we have given a very professional sounding polish to this track. Now all that's left to do is mix it. I hope you enjoyed this video series on recording and producing professional vocal tracks in a home studio. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the studio next time. Thanks.